What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking another look at the Motorola Moto G Pure and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in late 2023. Now, this is probably one of the oldest phones I'm still sort of making videos about, so this will be pretty interesting. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So yeah, like I said before, the Moto G Pure is definitely an older phone being released in December of 2021, so it's been around for a while now, but with a device as simple as this, I feel like there's really not much more that you could possibly update without making it just a higher end device in general. This phone is really meant for more basic users who are looking for something super affordable that has pretty much everything you need for casual daily use, but at the same time, maybe you really just don't need a whole lot of features. For that kind of situation, that's where a phone like the Moto G Pure comes in. And again, in my opinion, I feel like even as time goes on, a phone like the Moto G Pure is just such a timeless kind of design, because after all, as long as it can send text messages, make calls, and maybe take an occasional decent photo every now and then, for a device like this that, despite originally going for around $160, can now be found around $100 or less, oftentimes even free depending on your carrier. For something in this segment, I feel like there's really only so much they can change. A great example of this is the Motorola Moto G Play 2023. That phone, I guess you could say, is technically this phone's successor, but at the same time, I've only seen that phone being offered from Cricket, who also does happen to carry the Moto G Pure. And when it comes to other prepaid carriers, like AT&T for example, even at this point in late 2023, again, a lot of them still do have this phone, so definitely interesting to see. Now with this device, despite being a really low-end phone, we are still getting a pretty decent display here. With the Moto G Pure, we're getting a 6.5-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 270, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So yeah, again, definitely a decent display here. The only thing that might be disappointing to some people, depending on how you're using your phone, is again, we are only getting a 720p resolution, so make of that what you will. I personally feel like for a phone like this is really all you can honestly expect, especially considering it's a bit older. So back when it first came out in late 2021, very few entry-level phones had 1080p displays, and now it's a bit more common, but still, if you are looking for a really basic device like this, the 720p is probably not going to bother you, especially considering despite only being 720p, it does still look pretty decent. And at 6.5 inches, despite technically being average, I personally still feel like 6.5 inches is a pretty decently large display, so if you're doing something like reading or browsing the web, using social media, stuff like that, you will still get a pretty good experience here. And as a nice bonus, I really do like the design and feel here. Despite having a 6.5-inch display, the phone definitely doesn't feel bulky at all, and even if you put a decently slim case on it, it still should be okay. So in general, if you're looking for a really affordable phone that still has an acceptable display, even in late 2023, I do think the Moto G Pure is definitely still a good choice. Now for storage, with the Moto G Pure, we're getting 32GB of internal storage here with microSD card expansion, and honestly, I feel like this is really the single biggest drawback here. Sure, on one hand, if you're really doing barely anything on your phone, you will at least be okay, probably, but 32GB is pretty small, especially considering now in 2023, really the Moto G Play 2023 is the only other phone I've seen this year that has that little storage, and honestly, that really makes no sense to me at all, but that's a completely different story. My point is 32GB, in addition to being kind of rare nowadays, even in entry-level phones, is definitely not going to be enough for most people, so if you're planning on having any decent amount of apps on your phone, you will be disappointed, but to be fair, I have a couple things on this phone, and despite having all the basics like a few streaming platforms, social media apps, games, and whatever other random things I put on it without remembering. As you can see, I have at least a little space free, and I didn't put a microSD card in this phone, so I guess if you are really conservative when it comes to space, you could probably get by, but as you can see from this, I'm sure you can imagine how it could fill up pretty quickly. So the bottom line here is, if storage is really a priority for you, or honestly if you really even care about storage at all, then I would definitely skip this phone, because at this point in 2023, again, you can probably find pretty much any other phone and it's gonna have way more storage than this. But if you're not really concerned about storage and you're really using this phone for like texting, making calls, and browsing the web and stuff like that, then in that case, if you're really just doing the bare minimum, then you might still be okay here. Now for security features, the Moto G Pure does have Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here on the power key. So real quick, let's give it a try. There we go, one more time. and there we go. So as you can see there, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, remember, we are getting face unlock here too. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. So definitely nice to have flexibility there. I know at this point in 2023, most phones have pretty much the same kind of setup here, but at the same time, the flexibility is always nice. Now for the camera setup, with the Moto G here, up front, we get a 5 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we get a dual camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. And then for video, this phone does have a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K, which honestly is not a surprise at all, but at least the selfie camera can record 1080p videos, because I have actually seen some phones like this that can only record in 720p. But in general, as you can probably tell, the camera is relatively featureless. Unfortunately, there's no ultra wide camera or macro camera, so overall, if you're really using your camera a lot, first of all, you're probably not going to be looking at a phone like this anyway, because when it comes to phones that have nice cameras, pretty much the lowest of the low end is not usually anyone's top choice. But just keep in mind, when it comes to photo quality, despite definitely not being anything exceptional or really even good enough for constant regular use, maybe you're taking like a bunch of photos on Instagram for example, then yeah, I would probably get something a bit better than this. But at the same time, the photo quality is still at least decently acceptable, so if you do want to take a presentable photo every now and then, it will at least get the job done. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G here, and again, the photos are decent here, but if you are really looking for a phone that can take nice photos, there are still several affordable options out there that are quite a bit better than this. So yeah, if that really is a priority for you, then I would skip this phone. But at the same time, if you're really just looking for something for maybe, I don't know, Snapchat, scanning barcodes, and again, taking the occasional acceptable photo every now and then, for that kind of use, it will at least get the job done. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Moto G we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G25 processor. Now, I will say this is definitely not a very fast phone, but despite this, in my experience doing pretty much everything you see on this phone, from stuff like Instagram, Twitter before it became X, I clearly haven't updated this phone for a long time, and then stuff like streaming videos, using Spotify, all this kind of stuff, it does at least get the job done. But keep in mind, if you're really going to be on your phone a lot doing demanding activities and stuff like that, when it comes down to it, this phone is definitely not very fast. So if you're expecting anything impressive, I would recommend getting something a bit higher end and a bit faster. But again, if you are really a light user and you're not really doing a ton on your phone, then surprisingly, I do think it will at least get the job done. Now for the battery, with the Moto G on one hand, when it comes to just the specs alone, it's not really that impressive, but essentially, this phone does have a 4000 mAh battery that also supports 10-watt fast charging. So yeah, considering at this point in late 2023, I want to say the vast majority of just phones in general have 5000 mAh batteries. So considering that, this is really not that impressive, but I will say in my experience, the battery life we get with this phone is actually surprisingly good. So if you are looking for a phone that has a decent battery, then I do think this phone will still be a decent choice. Now for the software, with the Moto G we are actually getting Android 12, so on one hand, considering we're on Android 13, technically Android 14 at this point, I will say it is a little outdated, but like I've been saying throughout this video, the Moto G is really meant for light users and more basic activities in general. And if you are looking for a phone for really the bare minimum, do you really care that much about the software? I mean, yeah, I know some people do, but with a phone like this that you're probably gonna end up getting for free anyway, if you don't care about the software, features, performance, stuff like that, and you really just need something to use as a phone and not really that much else, I do think it will at least get the job done. But of course, if you care about the software at all, that definitely is a huge drawback with this phone, so in that case, you will want to get something else. Also keep in mind, kinda unsurprisingly, the Moto G does not have NFC, so if you like to use tap and pay, you will want to get something else. But in conclusion, is the Motorola Moto G still worth buying in late 2023? Now, honestly, for a phone like this, I would normally say no, but considering what it's really meant for, and considering at this point most people getting it are probably going to get it for, if not free, at least really cheap, I feel like for what it is, it still is a pretty decently viable option. Sure, it doesn't have really any features besides just being a standard generic low-end smartphone, but at the same time, for stuff like texting, checking your email, browsing the web, or maybe playing a game or two or listening to music, for that kind of use, sure, it's really nothing fancy and the storage is pretty bad. But despite this, if you really just need a phone to have a phone and you don't need much else, sure, there are much nicer, newer options out there, but they're really not going to be all that different from this phone. So if you are considering getting this phone and you can get it for like free or at least close to it, then I would say if this is really all you need, then you might as well go for it, because when it comes to phones like this, the Moto G Pure definitely is solid. I mean, I haven't had any performance issues or any lagging or anything like that. So considering this, I do at least trust it to work. So at the end of the day, if all you want is the basics, then even at this point in late 2023, even this phone will probably still be enough. Now once again, if you want to learn more about this device, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.